Hi, it's Craig. Today I want to talk about turbochargers and how they're involved with VGTs, VDTs, and EGR. Now, a VGT is a variable geometry turbocharger, and a VDT is a variable displacement turbocharger. So this suggests that these turbochargers can make more or less boost, and that's exactly true. Now, EGR, exhaust gas return, is something that's been around since 1970s. It was on gasoline engines in vehicles in the 70s, in the early to mid 70s, and it was designed to cool these cylinders, the combustion chamber cylinders, so the less emissions were being put out. Now, this went on and different processes were in place to do that. By putting the exhaust gases through the EGR, exhaust gas return is what it stands for, returning it back to the intake manifold, mixing with the intake charge of air, and that essentially put inert gases into the combustion chamber, cooling and lack of oxygen, cooling down the process, reducing some of the emissions. Now, diesel engines weren't affected by this until later on, and in 2002, the amount of NOx, which is oxides of nitrogen, leaving an engine was reduced by 50% of what EPA mandated at that time. So stuff had to change. Up until that point, a turbocharger just boosted the air, mixed with the fuel, and gave the energy and the charge needed to make those diesel engines work hard. So now a 50% reduction had to be created. Keep in mind that by charging the air and mixing it with fuel, we create a really hot charge, a very explosive charge, which diesel engines needed, but we were also producing NOx. So EGR suggested that we cool down the combustion chambers. Now, the problem with cooling down combustion chambers is it makes hydrocarbons and carbon monoxide. So we had to come up with a way that when we could reduce NOx, we would, and when we needed to accelerate up a hill, per se, we would not reduce NOx. So after 2002, we put after-treatment systems in here. So we want to make the engines as clean as possible, but still functional. So what we had to do is come up with this VGT or VDT through the EGR system, and I'm going to explain that. So behind me here, I've drawn a picture, see if I can get to the side of it, and it explains down here, here's the exhaust manifold leading into the turbocharger, and then the impeller on the other side of the turbocharger. So what we were going to do is we were going to take exhaust gases after they left the turbocharger and send them up, cool them. They left the engine about 700 degrees Celsius. When they left here, it was about 200 degrees Celsius. So this is cooling the exhaust, which is going to go up through an EGR gas loop, which I'll explain in a minute, to a mixer. And I seem to have forgotten to draw this in. There we go. So into a mixer, and that's going to go into the engine's combustion chambers and help combustion. Now, what it's mixing with is air. We take the air, we turbocharge it, the shaft spins, it creates a lot of volume of air going through here, which pressurizes it. We have to cool it there to maintain the oxygen charge within the amount of air going through. So through an aftercooler and up to the mixer. So it's available at the mixer, as well as exhaust gases at the mixers. Now, keep in mind that when an engine is going up the hill under full boost, the EGR is not working. It is not mixing. It needs the energy, and it is producing NOx, which, if you look down here, we have a DOC, a diesel oxidation catalyst, which is going to deal with, well, actually it's going to deal with carbon monoxide, but later on down the system, we're going to deal with the NOx through the SCR. So now we have this available, but when we are traveling normally, driving in different conditions, we can reduce NOx. We can introduce some of this inert cooled exhaust gases mixed with air into the chamber. And through computerization, we can manage that. Now, there's an EGR loop here, which is just a venturi with a couple pressure sensors. And as the exhaust gas goes through this venturi, the pressure sensors can figure out the pressure of the gas, keeping in mind that there is pressurized air here. If the pressurized air exceeds the pressure of the gas, there will be no mixing. And this is a constant changing from speed and load. Our turbocharger is going to have more or less. So it's constantly changing. The volume of air could be constantly changing. So this pressure could change. This pressure could change. So this is also being measured by our computer, and then through our EGR loop, it is being measured. So it will be calculated by our computer to find out how much pressure is needed in here to send some of this inert, cooled exhaust gas into the mixing chamber to go into the engine to meet the needs at the time. So this is done very quickly through computerization. So this Venturi here is where it's going to measure that. The aftercooler side, or the fresh air side, has its own system to measure the temperatures and pressures of the air. So this is important that we mix it correctly. Now keep in mind that there's three modes. There's brake mode, there's boost mode, and there's EGR mode. So in boost mode, there's no EGR action. In EGR mode, we will be mixing the exhaust with the air to get the perfect mixture to reduce the NOx. Now, that being said, as I said earlier, when we reduce NOx, we increase hydrocarbons and carbon monoxide. So there's a balance here. So the computer is constantly balancing the mixture of inert gases with the clean air to get the best mixture of gas so we can reduce NOx. That being said, then we're going to increase hydrocarbons and carbon monoxide. Now, when this leaves the engine through the exhaust, it's going to go through a DOC, which is a diesel oxidization catalyst, which deals with carbon dioxide, and then a DPF that deals with hydrocarbons. And then after that, we have an SCR, which is going to deal with NOx. So this is a balance that's taking place here, and this is the system. So quickly, I'll go through it here. The engine is running, it's accelerated, it creates exhaust gases that are going to spin the turbocharger. Now, I should have mentioned that the VDT, variable displacement turbocharger, or variable geometry turbocharger, has fins in the turbocharger that can open or close. And when they close, they create higher pressures. When they open, they reduce the pressures. And that's going to affect the pressure in this line. That's what the computer is measuring. If it needs to mix the pressure, the exhaust, with this incoming air, and the pressures are wrong, it can adjust the vanes to increase or decrease the pressure and measure the amount that's being mixed. That's the whole point of the VDT or VGT. So we control those vanes, opening or closing, to create the mixtures we need. It goes through this EGR butterfly valve, and there's a small valve in there that's controlled by a pulse width modulation, BTM, brushless torque motor, that's going to adjust it according to what the computer says and the volume of mixture it needs. Then it goes through the EGR cooler. Again, this is coming out 700 degrees Celsius. It's cooled to about 200 degrees Celsius. This is connected to your cooling system. So you have two lines. The cooling system has to be enhanced, made bigger to manage this hot exhaust, or to cool this exhaust. It's an added load on the engine. So there'll be more antifreeze, there'll be a bigger centrifugal pump for the engine to have this cooling flow through the EGR cooler. Then that cooled exhaust, that inert mixture of air will go up through the EGR cooler, be measured for pressure and temperature, or for pressure anyways, and then it'll be mixed into the engine. So that's basically the system. I hope you found this helpful.